All right, we are coming up on 8 o'clock. So, let's go ahead and settle in, get comfortable, and get back to it, shall we? Welcome back. This is our third night of reading from the Adventures of Tom Sawyer. At the pace we're going, it's probably only going to be about another, 2 to 3 days. Thereabout. So, this is going to be a quick one, but despite its length, it is extremely interesting. It's a fun read so far. We've had the tapping into the universality of youth, the capricious nature of boys that are left to their own devices, and a little bit of things outside the norm. I'm not sure if everyone remembers witnessing murder when they're growing up, but pretending to be pirates, wandering out and soaking yourself in melodrama, that's pretty normal. Most people remember that sort of stuff. So, let's continue tonight from chapter 15 of the Adventures of Tom Sawyer and see what other sort of antics we can get up to. Alright, chapter 15. A few minutes later, Tom was in the shoal water of the bar, wading toward the Illinois shore. Before the depth reached his middle, he was halfway over. The current would permit no more wading now, so he struck out confidently to swim the remaining 100 yards. He swam quartering upstream, but still was swept downward rather faster than he had expected. However, he reached the shore finally, and drifted along till he found a low place and drew himself out. He put his hand on his jacket pocket, found his piece of bark safe, and then struck through the woods, following the shore with streaming garments. Shortly before 10 o'clock, he came out into an open place opposite the village, and saw the ferryboat lying in the shadow of the trees and the high bank. Everything was quiet under the blinking stars. He crept down the bank, watching with all his eyes, slipped into the water, swam 3 or 4 strokes, and climbed into the skiff that did yawl duty at the boat's stern. He laid himself down under the thwarts and waited, panting. Presently, the cracked bell tapped, and a voice gave the order to cast off. A minute or two later, the skiff's head was standing high up against the boat's wood swell, and the voyage was begun. Tom felt happy in his success, for he knew it was the boat's last trip for the night. At the end of a long 12 or 15 minutes, the wheels stopped, and Tom slipped overboard and swam ashore in the dusk, landing 50 yards downstream, out of danger of possible stragglers. He flew along the unfrequented alleys, and shortly found himself at his aunt's back fence. He climbed over, approached the L, and looked in at the sitting room window, for a light was burning there. There, Aunt Polly, Sid, Mary, and Joe Harper's mother grouped together talking. They were by the bed, and the bed was between them and the door. Tom went to the door and began to softly lift the latch. Then he pressed gently, and the door yielded a crack. He continued pushing cautiously and quaking every time it creaked, till he judged he might squeeze through on his knees. So he put his head through and began warily. "What makes the candle blow so?" said Aunt Polly. Tom hurried up. "Why, that door's open, I believe. Why, of course it is. No end to strange things now. Go along and shut it, Sid." Tom disappeared under the bed just in time. He lay and breathed himself for a time, and then crept to where he could almost touch his aunt's foot. "But as I was saying," said Aunt Polly, "he warn't bad, so to say, only mischievous. Only just giddy, and harum-scarum, you know. He warn't any more responsible than a colt. He never meant any harm, and he was the best-hearted boy that ever was." And she began to cry. "He was just so with my Joe, always full of his devilment, and up to every kind of mischief. But he was just as unselfish as kind as he could be, and laws bless me, to think I went and whipped him for taking that cream, never once recollecting that I throwed it out myself because it was sour. I never to see him again in this world. Never, never, never. Poor abused boy. and Mrs. Harper sobbed as if her heart would break. "I hope Tom's better off where he is," said Sid. "But if he'd been better in some ways—" "Sid!" Tom felt the glare of the old lady's eye, though he could not see it. "Not a word against my Tom now that he's gone. God'll take care of him. Never you trouble yourself, sir. Oh, Mrs. Harper, I don't know how to give him up. I don't know how to give him up. He was such a comfort to me, although he tormented my old heart out of me most." "The Lord giveth, and the Lord hath taken away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. But it's so hard. Oh, it's so hard. Only last Saturday, my Joe busted a firecracker right under my nose, and I knocked him sprawling. Little did I know then how soon. Oh, if I was to do it over again, I'd hug him and bless him for it." Yes. I know how you feel, Miss Harper. I know just exactly how you feel. No longer ago than yesterday noon, my Tom took and filled the cat full of painkiller, and I did think the creature would tear the house down. And God forgive me, I cracked Tom's head with my thimble. Poor boy, poor dear boy. But he's out of all his troubles now. The last words I ever heard of him was to reproach. But this memory was too much for the old lady, and she broke entirely down. Tom was snuffling now himself, and more in pity of himself than anybody else. He could hear Mary crying, and putting in a kindly word for him from time to time. He began to have a nobler opinion of himself than ever before. Still, he was sufficiently touched by his aunt's grief to long to rush out from under the bed and overwhelm her with joy. And the theatrical gorgeousness of the thing appealed strongly to his nature, too. But he resisted and stayed still. He went on listening, and gathered by odds and ends that it was conjectured, at first, that the boys had got drowned while taking a swim. Then the small raft had been missed. Next, certain boys said the missing lads had promised that the village should hear something soon. The wise heads had put this and that together, and decided that the lads had gone off on that raft, and would turn up at the next town below, presently. But toward noon, the raft had been found, lodged against the Missouri shore some 5 or 6 miles below the village. And then hope perished. Must be drowned. Or else hunger would have driven them home by nightfall, if not sooner. It was believed that the search for the bodies had been a fruitless effort merely because the drowning must have occurred in mid-channel, since the boys, being good swimmers, would otherwise have escaped to shore. This was Wednesday night. If the bodies continued missing until Sunday, all hope would be given over, and the funerals would be preached on that morning. Tom shuddered. Mrs. Harper gave a sobbing good night and turned to go. Then, with a mutual impulse, the two bereaved women flung themselves into each other's arms and had a good consoling cry, and then parted. Aunt Polly was tender far beyond her wont, in her good night to Sid and Mary. Sid snuffled a bit, and Mary went off crying with all her heart. Aunt Polly knelt down and prayed for Tom so touchingly, so appealingly, and with such measureless love in her words and her old trembling voice, that he was weltering in tears again, long before she was through. He had to keep still long after she went to bed, for she kept making broken-hearted ejaculations from time to time, tossing unrestfully and turning over. But at last she was still, only moaning a little in her sleep. Now the boy stole out, rose gradually by the bedside, shaded the candlelight with his hand, and stood regarding her. His heart was full of pity for her. He took out his sycamore scroll and placed it by the candle, but something occurred to him, and he lingered considering. His face lighted with a happy solution of his thought. He put the bark hastily in his pocket. Then he bent over and kissed the faded lips, and straightway made his stealthy exit, latching the door behind him. He threaded his way back to the ferry landing, found nobody at large there, and walked boldly on board the boat, for he knew there was she was tenantless, except that there was a watchman. who always turned in and slept like a graven image. He untied the skiff at the stern, slipped into it, and soon was rowing cautiously upstream. When he had pulled a mile above the village, he started quartering across and bent himself stoutly to his work. He hit the landing on the other side neatly, for this was a familiar bit of work to him. He was moved to capture the skiff, arguing that it might be considered a ship, and therefore legitimate prey for a pirate. But he knew a thorough search would be made for it, and that might end in revelations. So he stepped ashore and entered the woods. He sat down and took a long rest, torturing himself meanwhile to keep awake, and then started warily down the home stretch. The night was far spent. It was broad daylight, for he found himself fairly abreast the island bar. He rested again until the sun was well up and gliding the great river with its splendor, and then he plunged into the stream. A little later he paused, dripping, upon the threshold of the camp, and heard Joe say, "No, Tom's true blue, Huck. He'll come back. He won't desert. He knows that would be a disgrace to a pirate, and Tom's too proud for that sort of thing. He's up to something or other. Now I wonder what." "Well, the things is ours anyway, ain't they?" "Pretty near, but not yet, Huck. The writing says they are if he ain't back here to breakfast." "Which he is!" exclaimed Tom, with fine dramatic effect, stepping grandly into camp. A sumptuous breakfast of bacon and fish was shortly provided, and as the boys set to work upon it, Tom recounted, and adorned, his adventures. They were a vain and boastful company of heroes when the tale was done. Then Tom hid himself away in a shady nook to sleep till noon, and the other pirates got ready to fish and explore. That brings us to the end of chapter 15. So, as we expected, the village suspects the three boys dead, and 2 of them are mourned. All right. Chapter 16. After dinner, all the gang turned out to hunt for turtle eggs on the bar. They then went poking sticks into the sand, and when they found a soft place, they went down on their knees and dug with their hands. Sometimes they would take 50 or 60 eggs out of one hole. They were perfectly round, white things, a trifle smaller than an English walnut. They had a famous fried egg feast that night, and another on Friday morning. After breakfast, they went whooping and prancing out on the bar, and chased each other round and round, shedding clothes as they went, until they were naked, and then continued the frolic far away up the shoal water of the bar, against the stiff current, which later tripped their legs out from under them from time to time, and greatly increased the fun. And, now and then, they stooped in a group and splashed water in each other's faces, with their palms gradually approaching each other, with averted faces to avoid the strangling sprays, and finally gripping and struggling till the best man ducked his neighbor, and then they all went under in a tangle of white legs and arms and came up blowing, sputtering, and laughing and gasping for breath at one and the same. When they were all well exhausted, they would run out and sprawl in the dry, hot sand and lie there and cover themselves up with it, and by break for the water again and go through the original performance once more. Finally, it occurred to them that their naked skin represented flesh-colored tights very fairly, so they drew a ring in the sand and had a circus with 3 clowns in it, for none would yield this proudest post to his neighbor. Next they got their marbles and played knucks and ring-taw and keeps, till that amusement grew stale. Then Joe and Huck had another swim, but Tom would not venture, because he found that in kicking off his trousers, he had kicked his string of rattlesnake rattles off his ankle, and he wondered how he had escaped cramps so long without the protection of this mysterious charm. He did not venture again till he had found it, and by that time the other boys were tired and ready to rest. They gradually wandered apart, dropped into the dumps, and fell to gazing longingly across the wide river to where the village lay drowsing in the sun. Tom found himself riding Becky in the sand with his big toe. He scratched it out and was angry with himself for his weakness. but he wrote it again, nevertheless. He could not help it. He erased it once more, and then took himself out of temptation by driving the other boys together and joining them. But Joe's spirits had gone down almost beyond resurrection. He was so homesick that he could hardly endure the misery of it. The tears lay very near the surface. Huck was melancholy too. Tom was downhearted, but tried hard not to show it. He had a secret which he was not yet ready to tell. Yet. But if this mutinous depression was not broken up soon, he would have to bring it out. He said with a great show of cheerfulness, "I bet there's been pirates on this island before, boys. We'll explore it again. They've hid treasures here somewhere. How'd you feel to light on a rotten chest full of gold and silver, hey?" But it roused only faint enthusiasm, which faded out. With no reply, Tom tried one or two other seductions, but they failed too. It was discouraging work. Joe sat poking up the sand with a stick and looking very gloomy. Finally, he said, "Oh, boys, let's give it up. I want to go home. It's so lonesome." "Oh, no, Joe. You'll feel better by and by," said Tom. "Just think of the fishing that's here." "I don't care for fishing. I want to go home." "But, Joe, there ain't such another swimming place anywhere. Swimming's no good. I don't seem to care for it, somehow. When there ain't anybody to say I shan't go in, I mean to go home." "Ah, shucks, baby. You want to see your mother, I reckon." "Yes, I do want to see my mother, and you would too if you had one. I ain't any more baby than you are." And Joe snuffled a little. "We'll let the crybaby go home to his mother, won't we, Huck? Poor thing. Does it want to see its mother? And so it shall. You like it here, don't you, Huck? We'll stay, won't we?" Huck said, "Yes," without any heart in it. "I'll never speak to you again as long as I live," said Joe, rising. "There now." And he moved moodily away and began to dress himself. "Who cares?" said Tom. "Nobody wants you. Go along home and get laughed at. Oh, you're a nice pirate, Huck. Huck and me ain't crybabies. We'll stay, won't we, Huck? Let him go if he wants to. I reckon we can get along without him, perhaps." But Tom was uneasy, nevertheless, and was alarmed to see Joe go sullenly on with his dressing. And then it was discomforting to see Huck eyeing Joe's preparations so wistfully, and keeping up such an ominous silence. Presently, without a parting word, Joe began to wade off toward the Illinois shore. Tom's heart began to sink. He glanced at Huck. Huck could not bear the look, and dropped his eyes. Then he said, "I want to go too, Tom. It was getting so lonesome anyway, and now it'll be worse. Let's us go too, Tom." "I won't. You can all go if you want to. I mean to stay." "Tom, I better go." "Well, go along. Who's hindering you?" Huck began to pick up his scattered clothes. He said, "Tom, I wished you'd come too. Now you think it over. We'll wait for you when we get to shore." "Well, you'll wait a blame long time, that's all." Huck started sorrowfully away, and Tom stood looking after him, with a strong desire tugging at his heart to yield his pride and go along too. He hoped the boys would stop, but they still waded slowly on. It suddenly dawned on Tom that it was becoming very lonely and still. He made one final struggle with his pride, and then darted after his comrades, yelling, Wait! I want to tell you something!" They presently stopped and turned around. When he got to where they were, he began unfolding his secret, and they listened moodily till at last they saw the point he was driving at. And then they set up a war whoop of applause and said it was splendid, and said if he had told them at first, they wouldn't have started away. He made a plausible excuse, but his real reason had been the fear that not even the secret would keep them with him at any very great length of time, and so he had meant to hold it in reserve as a last seduction. The lads came gaily back and went at their sports again with a will, chattering all the time about Tom's stupendous plan and admiring the genius of it. After a dainty egg and fish dinner, Tom said he wanted to learn to smoke. Now, Joe caught at the idea and said he would like to try too, so Huck made pipes and filled them. These novices had never smoked anything but cigars made of grapevine, and they bit the tongue, and were not considered manly anyway. Now they stretched themselves out on their elbows, and began to puff, cheerily, and with a slender confidence. The smoke had an unpleasant taste, and they gagged a little. But Tom said, "Why, it's just as easy. If I'd have known this was all, I'd have learned long ago." "So would I," said Joe. "It's just nothing." "Why, many a time I've looked at people smoking and thought, well, I wish I could do that. But I never thought I could," said Tom. "That's just the way with me, ain't it, Huck? You heard me talk just that way, haven't you, Huck? I'll leave it to Huck if I haven't." "Yep, heaps of times," said Huck. "Well, I have too," said Tom. "Oh, hundreds of times. Once, down by the slaughterhouse. Don't you remember, Huck? Bob Tanner was there, and Johnny Miller, and Jeff Thatcher when I said it. Don't you remember, Huck, about me saying that?" "Yep, that's so," said Huck. "That was the day after I lost a White Alley. No, it was the day before." "There, I told you so," said Tom. "Huck recollects it." "I believe I could smoke this pipe all day," said Joe. "I don't feel sick." "Neither do I," said Tom. "I could smoke it all day. But I bet you Jeff Thatcher couldn't." "Jeff Thatcher? Why, he'd keel over with just 2 draws. Just let him try it once. He'd see." "I bet he would. And Johnny Miller. I wish I could see Johnny Miller tackle it once." "Oh, don't I?" said Joe. "Why, I bet you Johnny Miller couldn't any more do this than nothing. Just one little snifter would fetch him." "'Deed it would, Joe. Say, I wish the boys could see us now." "So do I. Say, boys, don't say anything about it. And sometime when they're around, I'll come up to you and say, 'Joe, got a pipe? I want to smoke.' And you'll say, kind of careless like, as if it warn't anything, you'll say, 'Yes, I got my old pipe and another one. But my tobacco ain't very good.' And I'll say, 'Oh, that's all right, if it's strong enough.' And then you'll out with the pipes, and we'll light up just as cam, and then just see 'em look. By jings, that'd be gay, Tom. I wish it was now." "So do I. And when we tell 'em we learned when we was off pirating, won't they wish they'd been along? Oh, I reckon not. I just bet they will." So the talk ran on, but presently it began to flag a trifle and grow disjointed. The silences widened. The expectoration marvelously increased. Every pore inside the boys' cheeks became a spouting fountain. They could scarcely bail out the cellars under their tongues fast enough to prevent an inundation. Little overflowings down their throats occurred in spite of all they could do, and sudden retchings followed every time. Both boys were looking very pale and miserable now. Joe's pipe dropped from his nerveless fingers. Tom's followed. Both fountains were going furiously, and both pumps bailing with might and main. Joe said feebly, "I've lost my knife. I reckon I'd better go and find it." Tom said with quivering lips and halting utterance, "I'll help you. You go over that way, and I'll hunt around by the spring. No, you needn't come, Huck. We can find it." So Huck sat down again and waited an hour. Then he found it lonesome and went to find his comrades. They were wide apart in the woods, both very pale, both fast asleep. But something informed him that if they had had any trouble, they had got rid of it. They were not talkative at supper that night. They had a humble look, and when Huck prepared his pipe after the meal and was going to prepare theirs, they said no, they were not feeling very well. Something they ate at dinner had disagreed with them. About midnight, Joe woke and called the boys. There was a brooding oppressiveness in the air that seemed to bode something. The boys huddled themselves together and sought the friendly companionship of the fire, though the dull, dead heat of the breathless atmosphere was stifling. They sat still, intent and waiting. The solemn hush continued. beyond the light of the fire, everything was swallowed up in the blackness of darkness. Presently, there came a quivering glow that vaguely revealed the foliage for a moment, and then vanished. By and by, another came, a little stronger. Then another, then a faint moan came sighing through the branches of the forest, and the boys felt a fleeting breath upon their cheeks, and shuddered with the fancy that the spirit of the night had gone by. There was a pause. Now a weird flash turned night into day, and showed every little grass blade, separate and distinct, that grew about their feet. And it showed 3 white, startled faces, too. A deep peal of thunder went rolling by, and tumbling down the heavens, and lost itself in sullen rumblings in the distance. A sweep of chilly air passed by, rustling all the leaves and snowing the flaky ashes broadcast about the fire. Another fierce glare lit up the forest, and an instant crash followed that seemed to rend the treetops right over the boys' heads. They clung together in terror, in the thick gloom that followed. A few big raindrops fell, pattering upon the leaves. "Quick, boys, go for the tent!" exclaimed Tom. They sprang away, stumbling over roots and among vines in the dark. No two plunging in the same direction. A furious blast roared through the trees, making everything sing as it went. One blinding flash after another came, and peal on peal of deafening thunder. And now a drenching rain poured down, and the rising hurricane drove it in sheets above the ground. The boys cried out to each other, but the roaring wind and the booming thunder blasts drowned their voices utterly. However, one by one, they straggled in at last, and took shelter under the tent, cold, scared, and streaming with water. But to have company in misery seemed something to be grateful for. They could not talk. The old sail flapped so furiously. Even if the other noises would have allowed them, the tempest rose higher and higher, and presently the sail tore loose from its fastenings and went winging away on the blast. The boys seized each other's hands and fled, with many tumblings and bruises, to the shelter of a great oak that stood upon the riverbank. Now the battle was at its highest. Under the ceaseless conflagration of lightning that flamed in the skies, everything below stood out in clean-cut and shadowless distinctness. The bending trees, the billowy river white with foam, the driving spray of spume flakes, the dim outlines of the high bluffs on the other side. Glimpsed through the drifting cloud rack, in the slanting veil of rain, every little while, some giant tree yielded the fight and fell crashing through the younger growth. And the unflagging thunder peals came now in ear-splitting explosive bursts, keen and sharp and unspeakably appalling. The storm culminated in one matchless effort that seemed likely to tear the island to pieces, burn it up, drown it in the treetops, blow it away, and deafen every creature in it, all at one and the same moment. It was a wild night for homeless young heads to be out in. But at last, the battle was done, and the forces retired with weaker and weaker threatenings and grumblings, and peace resumed her sway. The boys went back to camp, a good deal awed, but they found there was still something to be thankful for, because the great sycamore, the shelter of their beds, was a ruin, now blasted by the lightnings, and they were not under it when the catastrophe happened. Everything in camp was drenched, the campfire as well, for they were but heedless lads, like their generation, and had made no provision against rain. Here was a matter for dismay, for they were soaked through and chilled. They were eloquent in their distress, but they presently discovered that the fire had eaten so far up under the great log it had been built against, where it curved upward and separated itself from the ground, that a handbreadth or so of it had escaped wetting. So they patiently wrought until, with shreds and bark gathered from the undersides of sheltered logs, they coaxed the fire to burn again. Then they piled on great dead boughs until they heard a roaring furnace, and were glad-hearted once more. They dried their boiled ham and had a feast, and after that They sat by the fire and expanded and glorified their midnight adventure until morning, for there was not a dry spot to sleep on anywhere around. As the sun began to steal in upon the boys, drowsiness came over them, and they went out on the sandbar and lay down to sleep. They got scorched out by and by, and drearily set about getting breakfast. After the meal, they felt rusty and stiff-jointed, and a little homesick once more. Tom saw the signs, and fell to cheering up the pirates as well as he could, but they cared nothing for marbles or circus or swimming or anything. He reminded them of the imposing secret, and raised a ray of cheer. While it lasted, he got them interested in a new device. This was to knock off being pirates for a while, and be Indians for a change. They were attracted by this idea, so it was not long before they were stripped and striped from head to heel with black mud like so many zebras, all of them chiefs, of course. And then they went tearing through the woods to attack an English settlement. By and by, they separated into 3 hostile tribes, and darted upon each other from ambush with dreadful war whoops, and killed and scalped each other by thousands. It was a gory day. Consequently, it was an extremely satisfactory one. They assembled in camp towards supper time, hungry and happy. But now a difficulty arose. Hostile Indians could not break the bread of hospitality together without first making peace. And this was a simple impossibility without smoking a pipe of peace. There was no other process that they ever had heard of. 2 of the savages almost wished they had remained pirates. However, there was no other way. So, with such show of cheerfulness as they could muster, they called for the pipe, and took their whiff as it passed, in due form. And behold, they were glad they had gone into savagery. They had gained something. They found that they could now smoke a little, without having to go and hunt for a lost knife. They did not get sick enough to be seriously uncomfortable. They were not likely to fool away this high promise for lack of effort. No, they practiced cautiously, after supper, with right fair success. And so they spent a jubilant evening. They were prouder and happier in their new acquirement than they would ever have been in the scalping and skinning of the 6 nations. We will leave them to smoke and chatter and brag, since we have no further use of them at present. And that brings us to the end of chapter 16. Yeah, that brought to mind the, I don't know if you remember it. Did you watch Sandlot? And then the boys had got the chewing tobacco? Yeah, exactly, yeah. It's kind of a staple. We had the same thought. I'm sure it was inspired by Tom Sawyer at this point. Now thinking back, I'm like, it had to have been. They're like, oh yeah, that's just how it comes about. But that's exactly the one I had in mind, is them having the chewing tobacco and then getting sick as they're going about. Like, yep, that's what's going on. All right. So it sounds like this next one is a short chapter and a bit of a distraction from the boys' antics. Yeah, and that's, I think it was brought back into presence by Sandlot, I think, and then you'd see it from time to time and again on other things, but it definitely had to have come from this. There's no way, like that, or it's just a genuine rite of passage for boys in those days, because there's not really anything better to do, honestly. All right, let's continue with chapter 17. But there was no hilarity in the little town that same tranquil Saturday afternoon. Yeah, that is fun. So much of the things started right from this. There may have been some reference beforehand, or it may have just been, things that came up, but this is really what codified a lot of tropes that we see today in various media. It doesn't have to be the same adaptations or anything. We just keep seeing them come up, and it's like, oh yeah, it must have started here. The Harpers and Aunt Polly's family were being put into mourning, with great grief and many tears. An unusual quiet possessed the village, although it was ordinarily quiet enough, in all conscience. The villagers conducted their concerns with an absent air, and talked little, but they sighed often. The Saturday holiday seemed a burden to the children. They had no heart in their sports, and gradually gave them up. In the afternoon, Becky Thatcher found herself moping about the deserted schoolhouse yard and feeling very melancholy. But she found nothing there to comfort her. She soliloquized, "Oh, if only I had a brass andiron knob again. But I haven't got anything now to remember him by." And she choked back a little sob. Presently she stopped and said to herself, "It was right here. Oh, if it was to do over again, I wouldn't say that. I wouldn't say it for the whole world. But he's gone now. I'll never, never, never see him any more." This thought broke her down, and she wandered away with tears rolling down her cheeks. Then quite a group of boys and girls, playmates of Tom's and Joe's, came by, and stood looking over the paling fence, and talking in reverent tones of how Tom did so-and-so the last time they saw him, and how Joe said this and that small trifle, pregnant with awful prophecy, as they could easily see now. And each speaker pointed out the exact spot where the last lost lads stood at the time, and then added something like, "And I was a-standing just so, just as I am now, and as if you was him, I was as close as that, and he smiled just this way, and then something seemed to go all over me like awful, you know. I never thought what it meant, of course, but I can see it now." Then there was a dispute about who saw the dead boys last in life, and many claimed that dismal distinction, and offered evidences, more or less tampered with, by the witness. And when it was ultimately decided who did see the departed last, and exchanged the last words with them, the lucky parties took upon themselves a sort of sacred importance, and were gaped at and envied by all the rest. One poor chap, who had no other grandeur to offer, said with tolerably manifest pride in the remembrance, "Well, Tom Sawyer, he licked me once." But that bid for glory was a failure. Most of the boys could say that, and so that cheapened the distinction too much. The group loitered away, still recalling memories of the lost heroes in awed voices. When the Sunday school hour was finished, the next morning, the bell began to toll. Instead of ringing in the usual way, it was a very still Sabbath, and the mournful sound seemed in keeping with the musing hush that lay upon nature. The villagers began to gather, loitering a moment in the vestibule to converse in whispers about the sad event. But there was no whispering in the house, only the funereal rustling of dresses as the women gathered to their seats disturbed the silence there. None could remember when the little church had been so full before. There was finally a waiting pause, an expectant dumbness, and then Aunt Polly entered, followed by Sid and Mary, and they by the Harper family, all in deep black. And the whole congregation, the old minister as well, rose reverently and stood until the mourners were seated in the front pew. There was another communing silence, broken at intervals by muffled sobs. And then the minister spread his hands abroad and prayed. A moving hymn was sung, and the text followed. "I am the resurrection and the life." As the service proceeded, the clergyman drew such pictures of the graces, the winning ways, the rare promise of the lost lads, that every soul there, thinking he recognized these pictures, felt a pang in remembering that he had persistently blinded himself to them always before, and had as persistently seen only faults and flaws in the poor boys. The minister related many a touching incident in the lives of the departed, too, which illustrated their sweet, generous natures. And the people could easily see now how noble and beautiful those episodes were, and remembered with grief that at the time they occurred, They had seemed rank rascalities, well deserving of the cowhide. The congregation became more and more moved as the pathetic tale went on, till, at last, the whole company broke down and joined the weeping mourners in a chorus of anguished sobs, the preacher himself giving way to his feelings and crying in the pulpit. There was a rustle in the gallery, which nobody noticed. A moment later, the church door creaked. The minister raised his streaming eyes above his handkerchief and stood transfixed. First one, and then another pair of eyes followed the minister's, and then, almost with one impulse, the congregation rose and stared while the three dead boys came marching up the aisle, Tom in the lead, Joe next, and Huck, a ruin of drooping rags, sneaking sheepishly in the rear. They had been hid in the unused gallery, listening to their own funeral sermon. Aunt Polly, Mary, and the Harpers threw themselves upon the restored ones, smothered them with kisses, and poured out thanksgivings, while poor Huck stood abashed and uncomfortable, not knowing exactly what to do or where to hide from so many unwelcoming eyes. He wavered and started to slink away, but Tom seized him and said, "Aunt Polly, it ain't fair. Somebody's got to be glad to see Huck." "And so they shall. I'm glad to see him, poor motherless thing." And the loving attentions Aunt Polly lavished upon him were the one thing capable of making him more uncomfortable than he was before. Suddenly the minister shouted at the top of his voice, "Praise God, from whom all blessings flow. Sing, and put your hearts in it." And they did. Old Hundred swelled up with a triumphant burst. While it shook the rafters, Tom Sawyer, the pirate, looked around upon the envying juveniles about him and confessed in his heart that this was the proudest moment of his life. As the sold congregation trooped out, they said they would almost be willing to be made ridiculous again to hear Old Hundred sung like that once more. Tom got more cuffs and kisses that day, according to Aunt Polly's varying moods, than he had earned before in a year. He hardly knew which expressed the most gratefulness to God and affection for himself. And that brings us to the end of chapter 17. That's, it says something about the community, the village there, that they so quickly gave up on them, and then at the same time, as they came in, nobody was like really too angry with them, just like, "Oh, hey, they're back, hooray, hooray, praise God." Man, it was just like, by the next day they'd given up on them, and then they were just holding out. I guess it is a product of the times. Life was a fair bit cheaper back then, but all the same. Yeesh. All right. We should probably have another chapter in this before we take a break. So, let's keep things rolling and see what we'll get up to now that the boys are back. Their life of piracy and crime is done, and they're back in civilization. Chapter 18. That was Tom's great secret. The scheme to return home with his brother pirates and attend their own funerals. They had paddled over to the Missouri shore on a log at dusk on Saturday, landing 5 or 6 miles below the village. They'd slept in the woods at the edge of the town till early daylight, and then crept through back lanes and alleys and finished their sleep in the gallery of the church among a chaos of invalided benches. At breakfast Monday morning, Aunt Polly and Mary were very loving to Tom, and very attentive to his wants. There wasn't unusual amount of talk. In the course of it, Aunt Polly said, "Well, I don't say it wasn't a fine joke, Tom, to keep everybody suffering. Most weeks you boys had a good time, but it is a pity you could be so hard-hearted as to let me suffer so. If you could come over on a log to go to your funeral, you could have come over and give me a hint some way that you aren't dead, but only run off." "Yes, you could have done that, Tom," said Mary, "and I believe you would if you had thought of it." "Would you, Tom?" said Aunt Polly, her face lighting wistfully. "Say now, would you, if you'd thought of it?" Well, I don't know. 'Twould have spoiled everything." "Tom, I hoped you loved me that much," said Aunt Polly with a grieved tone that discomforted the boy. "It would have been something if you'd cared enough to think of it, even if you didn't do it." "Now, Auntie, that ain't any harm," pleaded Mary. "It's only Tom's giddy way. He is always in such a rush that he never thinks of anything." "More's the pity. Sid would have thought, and Sid would have come and done it too. Tom, you'll look back someday when it's too late, and you'll wish you'd cared a little more for me when it would have cost you so little." "Now, Auntie, you know I do care for you," said Tom. "I'd know it better if you acted more like it." "I wish now I'd thought," said Tom with a repentant tone. "But I dreamed about you anyway. That's something, ain't it?" "Ain't much. A cat does that much. But it's better than nothing. What'd you dream?" "Why, Wednesday night I dreamt that you was sitting over there by the bed, and Sid was sitting by the woodbox and Mary next to him." "Well, so we did. So we always do. I'm glad your dreams could take even that much trouble about us." "And I dreamt that Joe Harper's mother was here." "Why, she was here. Did you dream any more?" "Oh, lots, but it's so dim now." Nope, I think we're buffering a little. Either that or it's just my monitor. No, I don't see any dropped frames. I think we just had some touch of bad luck there is all. Alright, yeah, I think we're okay. "Well, try to recollect, can't you?" "Somehow it seems to me that the wind blowed the... Try harder, Tom. The wind did blow something. Come." Tom pressed his fingers on his forehead an anxious minute, and then said, "I've got it now. I got it now. It blowed the candle. Mercy on us. Go on, Tom. Go on." "And it seems to me you said, why, I believe that the door..." "Go on, Tom. Just let me study a moment. Just a moment. Oh, yes. You said you believed the door was open. As I'm sitting here, I did. Didn't I, Mary? Go on." And then... Well, I won't be certain, but it seems like as if you made Sid go and... Well, what did I make him do, Tom? What did I make him do?" "You made him... you made him shut it." "Well, for the land's sake, I never heard the beat of that in all my days. Don't tell me there ain't anything in dreams anymore. Serenity Harpy shall know this before I am an hour older. I'd like to see her get around this with her rubbish about superstition. Go on, Tom." "Oh, it's all getting just as bright as day now. Next, you said I weren't bad, only mischievous and harum-scarum, and not any more responsible than I think it was a cold or something." "And so it was. Well, goodness gracious, go on, Tom." "And then you began to cry." "Oh, so I did. Not the first time neither. And then Miss Harper, she began to cry, and said Joe was just the same, and she wished she hadn't whipped him for taking cream, then when she'd throw it out for her own self." "Tom, the spirit was upon you. You was prophesying. That's what you was doing. Land alive. Go on, Tom." Then Sid said, "I don't think I said anything," said Sid. "Yes, you did, Sid. Yes, you did, Sid," said Mary. "Shut your heads and let Tom go on. What did he say, Tom?" He said he hoped I was better off or I was going to. But if I'd been better sometimes... There! Do you hear that? It was his very words. And you shut him up sharp." "I lay I did. There must have been an angel there. There was an angel there, somewheres." "And Miss Harper told about Joe scaring her with a firecracker. And you told about Peter and the painkiller." just as true as I live. And then there was a whole lot of talk about dragging the river for us, about having the funeral Sunday, and then you and old Miss Harper hugged and cried, and she went. It happened just so. It happened just so. As sure as I'm a-sitting in these very tracks, Tom. You couldn't told it more like if you'd seen it. And then what? Go on, Tom. Then I thought you prayed for me, and I could see you and hear every word you said, and you went to bed. I'm so sorry that I took and wrote on a piece of sycamore bark, "We ain't dead, we is only off being pirates," and put it on the table by the candle. And then you looked so good laying there asleep that I thought I went and leaned over and kissed you on the lips. Did you, Tom? Did you? I just forgive you everything for that. And she seized the boy in a crushing embrace that made him feel like the guiltiest of villains. It was very kind, even though it was only a dream, Sid soliloquized, just audibly. Shut up, Sid! Body does just the same in a dream as he'd do if he was awake. Here's a big Millam apple I've been saving for you, Tom, if you was ever found again. Now go along to school. I'm thankful to the good God and Father of us all that got you back. That's a long-suffering and merciful to them that believe on him and keep his word, though goodness knows I'm unworthy of it. But if only the worthy ones got his blessings and had his hand to help them over the rough places, there's few enough would smile here or ever enter into his rest when the long night comes. Go along, Sid, Mary, Tom. Take yourselves off. You've handed me long enough. The children left for school, and the old lady to call on Mrs. Harper and vanquish her realism with Tom's marvelous dream. Sid had better judgment than to utter the thought that was in his mind as he left the house. It was this. Pretty thin. As long a dream as that, without any mistakes in it. What a hero Tom has become now! He did not go skipping and prancing, but moved with a dignified swagger, as became a pirate who felt that the public eye was on him. And indeed it was. He tried not to seem to see the looks or hear the remarks as he passed along, but they were food and drink to him. Smaller boys than himself flocked at his heels, as proud to be seen with him and tolerated by him as if he had been the drummer at the head of a procession, or the elephant leading a menagerie into town. Boys of his own size pretended not to know he had been away at all, but they were consuming with envy, nevertheless. They would have given anything to have that swarthy, sun-tanned skin of his, and his glittering notoriety. And Tom would not have parted with either for a circus. At school, the children made so much of him and Joe, and delivered such eloquent admiration from their eyes, that the two heroes were not long in becoming insufferably stuck up. They began to tell their adventures to hungry listeners, but they only began. It was not a thing likely to have an end, with imaginations like theirs to furnish material. And finally, when they got out their pipes and went serenely puffing around, the very summit of glory was reached. Tom decided that he could be independent of Becky Thatcher now. Glory was sufficient. He would live for glory. Now that he was distinguished, maybe she would be wanting to make up. Well, let her. She should see that he could be as indifferent as some other people. Presently she arrived. Tom pretended not to see her. He moved away and joined a group of boys and girls and began to talk. Soon he observed that she was tripping gaily back and forth, with flushed face and dancing eyes, pretending to be busy chasing schoolmates, and screaming with laughter when she made a capture. But he noticed that she always made her captures in his vicinity, and that she seemed to cast a conscious eye in his direction at such times, too. It gratified all the vicious vanity that was in him, and so, instead of winning him, it only set him up the more and made him the more diligent to avoid betraying that he knew she was about. Presently, she gave over skylarking and moved irresolutely about, sighing once or twice and glancing furtively and wistfully toward Tom. Then she observed that now Tom was talking more particularly to Amy Lawrence than to anyone else. She felt a sharp pang and grew disturbed and uneasy at once. She tried to go away, but her feet were treacherous, and carried her to the group instead. She said to a girl almost at Tom's elbow with sham vivacity, "Why, Mary Austin, you bad girl, why didn't you come to Sunday school?" "I did come. Didn't you see me?" "Why, no, did you? Where did you sit?" I was in Miss Peters' class, where I always go. I saw you. Did you? Why, it's funny, I didn't see you. I wanted to tell you about the picnic." "Oh, that's jolly. Who's going to give it?" "My ma's going to let me have one." "Oh, goody. I hope she'll let me come." "Well, she will. The picnic's for me. She'll let anybody come that I want, and I want you." "That's ever so nice. When's it going to be?" "By and by. Maybe about vacation." "Oh, won't it be fun? You going to have all the girls and boys?" "Yes. Everyone that's friends to me, or wants to be." And she glanced ever so furtively at Tom, but he talked right along to Amy Lawrence about the terrible storm on the island, and how the lightning tore the great sycamore tree all to flinders, while he was standing within 3 feet of it. "Oh, may I come?" said Grace Miller. "Yes." "And me?" said Sally Rogers. "Yes." "And me too?" said Susie Harper. "And Joe?" "Yes." And so on, with clapping of joyful hands, till all the group had begged for invitations but Tom and Amy. Then Tom turned coolly away, still talking, and took Amy with him. Becky's lips trembled and the tears came to her eyes. She hid these signs with a forced gaiety and went on chattering, but the life had gone out of the picnic now. And out of everything else. She got away as soon as she could, and hid herself, and had what her sex call a good cry. Then she sat moody, with wounded pride, till the bell rang. She roused up now with a vindictive cast in her eye, and gave her plaited tails a shake, and said she knew what she'd do. At recess, Tom continued his flirtation with Amy with jubilant self-satisfaction, and he kept drifting about to find Becky and lacerate her with the performance. At last he spied her, but there was a sudden falling of his mercury. She was sitting cozily on a little bench behind the schoolhouse, looking at a picture book with Alfred Temple, and so absorbed were they that their heads so close together over the book that they did not seem to be conscious of anything in the world besides. Jealousy ran red-hot through Tom's veins. He began to hate himself for throwing away the chance Becky had offered for reconciliation. He called himself a fool and all the hard names he could think of. He wanted to cry with vexation. Amy chatted happily along, and they walked, for her heart was singing, but Tom's tongue had lost its function. He did not hear what Amy was saying. And whenever she paused expectantly, he could only stammer an awkward assent, which was as often misplaced as otherwise. He kept drifting to the rear of the schoolhouse again and again to sear his eyeballs with the hateful spectacle there. He could not help it, and it maddened him to see, as he thought he saw, that Becky Thatcher never once suspected that he was even in the land of the living. But she did see nevertheless, and she knew she was winning her fight too, and was glad to see him suffer as she had suffered. Amy's happy prattle became intolerable. Tom hinted at things he had to attend to, things that must be done, and time was fleeting. But in vain. The girl chirped on. Tom thought, "Oh, hang her. I ain't ever going to get rid of her." At last, he must be attending to those things, and she said artlessly that she would be around when school let out, and he hastened away, hating her for it. Any other boy, Tom thought, grating his teeth, any boy in the whole town but that St. Louis smarty that thinks he dresses so fine and is aristocracy. Oh, all right. I licked you the first day you ever saw this town, mister, and I'll lick you again. You just wait till I catch you out. I'll just take him. And he went through the motions of thrashing an imaginary boy, pummeling the air and kicking and gouging. Oh, you do you? You holler enough, do you? Now then, now let that learn you. And so the imaginary flogging was finished to his satisfaction. Tom fled home at noon. His conscience could not endure any more of Amy's grateful happiness, and his jealousy could bear no more of the other distress. Becky resumed her picture inspections with Alfred, but as the minutes dragged along and no Tom came to supper, her triumph began to cloud and she lost interest. Gravity and absent-mindedness followed, and then melancholy. 2 or 3 times she pricked up her ear at a footstep, but it was a false hope. No Tom came. At last she grew entirely miserable and wished she hadn't carried it so far. When poor Alfred, seeing that he was losing her, he did not know how, kept exclaiming, "Oh, here's a jolly one. Look at this." She lost patience at last and said, "Oh, don't bother me. I don't care for them," and burst into tears and got up and walked away. Alfred dropped alongside and was going to try and comfort her, but she said, "Go away and leave me alone, can't you? I hate you." So the boy halted, wondering what he could have done, for she had said she would look at pictures all through the nooning, and she walked on, crying. Then Alfred went musing into the deserted schoolhouse. He was humiliated and angry. He easily guessed his way to the truth. The girl had simply made a convenience of him to vent her spite upon Tom Sawyer. He was far from hating Tom the less when this thought occurred to him. He wished there was some way to get that boy into trouble without much risk to himself. Tom's spelling book fell under his eye. Here was the opportunity. He gratefully opened to the lesson for the afternoon and poured ink upon the page. Becky, glancing in at a window behind him at the moment, saw the act and moved on without discovering herself. She started homeward now, intending to find Tom and tell him. Tom would be thankful, and their troubles would be healed. Before she was halfway home, however, she had changed her mind. The thought of Tom's treatment of her when she was talking about her picnic came scorching back and filled her with shame. She resolved to let him get whipped on the damaged spelling book's account, and to hate him forever into the bargain. And that brings us to the end of chapter 18. There are bits and pieces where you're just like, all right, yeah, these are just kids. And then they act, so much more mature. Like, it's like, all right, they're like 10, or they're like teenagers, or they're like 10, or they're like teenagers. And yeah, exactly. I am glad I'm old now and past all that nonsense. That is for certain. All right, let's go ahead and take a few minutes, top up your drinks, stretch your legs, and we'll be back in just a little while to continue from chapter 19. All right, we are back. So, there's been schoolyard nonsense and drama and backbiting all throughout already. The boys have made it back to the land of the living and enjoying their moment of heroism, and they're probably living it up a little bit too much, if we're being entirely honest, which is understandable. You say boys will be boys, but really these boys are a little bit more precocious than most, let's be honest. So, let's continue now and see how things all fall to pieces, because now that they're at an up, there must be a down. So, continuing now with chapter 19. Tom arrived at home in a dreary mood, and the first thing his aunt said to him showed him that he had brought his sorrows to an unpromising market. "Tom, I've a notion to skin you alive." "Auntie, what have I done?" "Well, you've done enough. Here I go over to Sarah Harper, like an old softy, expecting I'm going to make her believe all that rubbish about that dream, when lo and behold, she'd found out from Joe that you was over here and heard all that talk we had that night. Tom, I don't know what is to become of a boy that will act like that. It makes me feel so bad to think you could let me go to Sarah Harper and make such a fool of myself and never say a word." This was a new aspect of the thing. His smartness of the morning had seemed to Tom a good joke before, and very ingenious. It merely looked mean and shabby now. He hung his head and could not think of anything to say for a moment. Then he said, "Auntie, I wish I hadn't done it, but I didn't think." "Oh, child, you never think. You never think of anything but your own selfishness. You think to come all the way over here from Jackson's Island in the night to laugh at your troubles. And you could think to fool me with a lie about a dream. But you couldn't ever think to pity us and save us from sorrow." "Auntie, I know how now it was mean. I didn't mean to be mean. I didn't, honest. And besides, I didn't come over here to laugh at you that night." "What did you come here for, then?" "It was to tell you that not to be uneasy about us, because we hadn't got drowned." Tom, I would be the thankfulest soul in this world if I could believe you ever had as good a thought as that. But you know you never did. And I know it, Tom." Indeed I did, Auntie. Wish I may never stir if I didn't." "Oh, Tom, don't lie. Don't do it. It only makes things 100 times worse." "It ain't a lie, Auntie. It's the truth. I wanted to keep you from grieving. That was all that made me come." "I give the whole world to believe that. It would cover up a pile of sins, Tom. I'd most be glad you'd run off and acted so bad. But I ain't reasonable. Because, why didn't you tell me, child?" "Why, you see, when you got to talking about the funeral, I just got all full of the idea of coming and hiding in the church. I couldn't somehow bear to spoil it. So I just put the bark back in my pocket and kept mum." "What bark?" "The bark I wrote on to tell you we'd gone pirating. I wish now you'd waked up when I kissed you. I do, honest." The hard lines in his aunt's face relaxed, and a sudden tenderness dawned in her eyes. "Did you kiss me, Tom?" "Why, yes, I did." "Are you sure you did, Tom?" "Why, yes, I did, Auntie. Certain sure." "What did you kiss me for, Tom?" "'Cause I loved you so, and you laid there moaning, and I was so sorry." The words sounded like truth. The old lady could not hide a tremor in her voice when she said, "Kiss me again, Tom, and be off with you to school now, and don't bother me any more." The moment he was gone, she ran to a closet and got out the ruin of a jacket which Tom had gone pirating in. Then she stopped, with it in her hand, and said to herself, "No, I don't dare. Poor boy, I reckon he's lied about it. But it's a blessed, blessed lie. There's such a comfort come from it. I know the Lord will forgive him. There was such a good-heartedness in him to tell it. But I don't want to find out it's a lie. I won't look. She put the jacket away and stood by, musing a minute. Twice she put out her hand to take the garment again, and twice she refrained. Once more she ventured, and this time she fortified herself with the thought, it's a good lie. It's a good lie. I won't let it grieve me. So she sought the jacket pocket. A moment later, she was reading Tom's piece of bark through flowing tears and saying, I could forgive the boy now, if he'd committed a million sins. That was a short one for sure. And yeah, kids, not only is he a child, he's a particularly naughty child. So, forethought, not exactly one of his fortes. All right, let's continue with chapter 20. There was something about Aunt Polly's manner when she kissed Tom that swept away his low spirits and made him light-hearted and happy again. He started to school and had the luck of coming upon Becky Thatcher at the head of Meadow Lane. His mood always determined his manner. Without a moment's hesitation, he ran to her and said, I acted mighty mean to you today, Becky, and I'm so sorry. I won't ever do that way again, as long as I ever live. Please make up, won't you? The girl stopped and looked him scornfully in the face. I'll thank you to keep yourself to yourself, Mr. Thomas Sawyer. I'll never speak to you again. She tossed her head and passed on. Tom was so stunned that he had not even presence of mind enough to say, Who cares, Miss Smarty, until the right time to say it had gone by. So he said nothing. But he was in a fine rage, nevertheless. He moped into the schoolyard, wishing she were a boy and imagining how he would trounce her if she were. He presently encountered her and delivered a stinging remark as she passed. She hurled one in return, and the angry breach was complete. It seemed to Becky, in her hot resentment, that she could hardly wait for school to take in. She was so impatient to see Tom flogged for the injured spelling book. If she had had any lingering notion of exposing Alfred Temple, Tom's offensive fling had driven it entirely away. Poor girl. She did not know how fast she was nearing trouble herself. The master, Mr. Dobbins, had reached middle age with an unsatisfied ambition. The darling of his desires was to be a doctor, but poverty had decreed that he should be nothing higher than a village schoolmaster. Every day he took a mysterious book out of his desk and absorbed himself in it at times when no classes were reciting. He kept that book under lock and key. There was not an urchin in the school but was perishing to have a glimpse of it, but the chance never came. Every boy and girl had a theory about the nature of that book, but no two theories were alike, and there was no way of getting at the facts in the case. Now, as Becky was passing by the desk, which stood near the door, she noticed that the key was in the lock. It was a precious moment. She glanced around, found herself alone, and the next instant she had the book in her hands. The title page, Professor Somebody's Anatomy, carried no information to her mind, so she began to turn the leaves. She came at once upon a handsomely engraved and colored frontispiece, a human figure stark naked. At that moment, a shadow fell on the page, and Tom Sawyer stepped in at the door and caught a glimpse of the picture. Becky snatched at the book to close it, and had the hard luck to tear the pictured page half down the middle. She thrust the volume into the desk, turned the key, and burst out crying with shame and vexation. Tom Sawyer, you are just as mean as you can be, to sneak up on a person and look at what they're looking at. How could I know you was looking at anything? You ought to be ashamed of yourself, Tom Sawyer. You know you're going to tell on me, and oh, what shall I do? What shall I do? I'll be whipped. I never was whipped in school. Then she stamped her little foot and said, Be so mean if you want to. I know something's going to happen. You just can't wait and you'll see. Hateful, hateful, hateful. And she flung out of the house with a new explosion of crying. Tom stood still, rather flustered by this onslaught. Presently he said to himself, "What a curious fool of a girl she is. Never been licked in school. Shucks! What's a licking? That's just like a girl. They're so thin-skinned and chicken-hearted. Well, of course I ain't going to tell old Dobbins on this little fool, because there's other ways of getting even on her. That ain't so mean. What of it? Old Dobbins will ask who it was who tore his book. Nobody will answer. And then he'll do just the way he always does. Ask first one and then the other, and when it comes to the right girl, he'll know it. Without any telling. Girls' faces always tell on them. They ain't got any backbone. She'll get licked. Well, it's a kind of a tight place for Becky Thatcher, because there ain't any way out of it." Tom conned the thing a moment longer, and then added, All right, though. If she'd like to see me in just such a fix, let her sweat it out." Tom joined the mob of skylarking scholars outside. In a few moments, the master arrived and school took in. Tom did not feel a strong interest in his studies. Every time he stole a glance at the girl's side of the room, Becky's face troubled him. Considering all things, he did not want to pity her, and yet it was all he could do to help it. He could get up no exultation that was really worthy the name. Presently the spelling book discovery was made, and Tom's mind was entirely full of his own matters for a while after that. Becky roused up from her lethargy of distress and showed good interest in the proceedings. She did not expect that Tom could get out of his trouble by denying that he spilt the ink on the book himself, and she was right. The denial only seemed to make the thing worse for Tom. Becky supposed she would be glad of that, and she tried to believe she was glad of it, but she found she was not certain. When the worst came to the worst, she had an impulse to get up and tell on Alfred Temple. But she made an effort and forced herself to keep still, because she said to herself, "He'll tell about me tearing the picture, sure. I wouldn't say a word, not to save his life." Tom took his whipping and went back to his seat, not at all broken-hearted, for he thought it was possible that he had unknowingly upset the ink on the spelling book himself in some skylarking bout. He had denied it for form's sake and because it was custom, and had struck to the denial from principle. A whole hour drifted by. The master sat nodding in his throne. The air was drowsy with the hum of study. By and by, Mr. Dobbins straightened himself up, yawned, then unlocked his desk, and reached for his book, but seemed undecided whether to take it out or leave it. Most of the pupils glanced up languidly, but there were two among them that watched his movements with intent eyes. Mr. Dobbins fingered his book absently for a while, then took it out and settled himself in his chair to read. Tom shot a glance at Becky. He had seen a hunted and helpless rabbit look as she did, with a gun leveled at its head. Instantly, he forgot his quarrel with her. Quick, something must be done in a flash, too! But the very imminence of the emergency paralyzed his invention. Good! He had an inspiration. He would run and snatch the book, spring through the door, and fly. But his resolution shook for one little instant, and the chance was lost. The master opened the volume. If Tom only had the wasted opportunity back again! Too late. There was no help for Becky now, he said. The next moment, the master faced the school. Every eye sank under his gaze. There was that in it which smote even the innocent with fear. There was silence, while one might count to 10. The master was gathering his wrath. Then he spoke. Who tore this book? There was not a sound. One could have heard a pin drop. The stillness continued. The master searched face after face for signs of guilt. Benjamin Rogers, did you tear this book? A denial. Another pause. Joseph Harper, did you? Another denial. Tom's uneasiness grew more and more intense under the slow torture of these proceedings. The master scanned the ranks of boys, considered a while, then turned to the girls. Amy Lawrence, a shake of the head. Gracie Miller, the same sigh. Susan Harper, did you do this? Another negative. The next girl was Becky Thatcher. Tom was trembling from head to foot with excitement and a sense of hopelessness of the situation. Rebecca Thatcher. Tom glanced at her face. It was white with terror. Did you tear? No, look me in the face. Her hand rose in appeal. Did you tear this book? A thought shot like lightning through Tom's brain. He sprang to his feet and shouted, I done it! The school stared in perplexity at this incredible folly. Tom stood a moment to gather his dismembered faculties, and when he stepped forward to go to his punishment, the surprise, the gratitude, the adoration that shone upon him out of poor Becky's eyes seemed to pay enough for 100 floggings. Inspired by the splendor of his own act, he took without an outcry the most merciless flaying that even Mr. Dobbins had ever administered. He also received, with indifference, the added cruelty of a command to remain 2 hours after school should be dismissed, for he knew who would await for him outside till his captivity was done, and not count the tedious time as a loss either. Tom went to bed that night, planning vengeance against Alfred Temple, for with shame and repentance, Becky had told him all, not forgetting her own treachery, but even the lodging for vengeance had to give way soon to pleasanter musings. He fell asleep at last, with Becky's latest words lingering dreamily in his ear. Tom, how could you be so noble? That is the end of chapter 20. Yep. Saw that coming. But how it played out, every once in a while, Tom does have a bit of a romantic streak in him, shall we say. To stand up for and take the punishment of another because he's too moved. Moved to stand up. Kids. All right, let's go ahead and continue now with chapter 21. Before we get back to it, there's been some happenings, some goings on, but really not a lot of plot ever since the night with the murder with Injun Joe and Muff Potter. That's just kind of happened in isolation, and then not really anything at all. They've been up to boyish antics. They went off to go pirating. The village thought them dead, which, that's some excitement of its own. But really, it's just more day-to-day antics at that point. So you kind of have to wait for the shoe to drop, something to happen to really cause this to be an adventure, right? Because this is, so far, it's not so much the adventures of Tom Sawyer, it's the mischief of Tom Sawyer. There's a bit of a difference between mischief and adventures, right? Right? All right. Chapter 21. Vacation was approaching. The schoolmaster, always severe, grew severer. If you say shenanigans one more time, I swear to God. For he wanted the school to make good showing on examination day. His rod and his ferrule were seldom idle now, at least among the smaller pupils. Only the biggest boys and young ladies of 18 and 20 escaped lashing. Mr. Dobbins is... Hold on, 18 and 20? Oh, they have to be, that has to be the count of the kids, not the ages. Only the biggest boys and young ladies of 18 and 20 escaped lashing. Mr. Dobbins's lashings were very rigorous ones too, for although he carried under his wig a perfectly bald and shiny head, he had only reached middle age, and there was no sign of feebleness in his muscle. As the great day approached, all the tyranny... Yep, we're sharing a brain cell tonight. All the tyranny that was in him came to the surface. He seemed to take a vindictive pleasure in punishing the least shortcomings. The consequence was that the smaller boys spent their days in terror and suffering and their nights in plotting revenge. They threw away no opportunity to do the master a mischief, but he kept always ahead, all the time. The retribution that followed every vengeful success was so sweeping and majestic that the boys always retired from the field badly worsted. At last, they conspired together and hit upon a plan that promised a dazzling victory. They swore in the sign painter's boy, told him the scheme, and asked his help. He had his own reasons for being delighted, for the master boarded in his father's family and had given the boy ample cause to hate him. The master's wife would go on a visit to the country in a few days, and there would be nothing to interfere with the plan. The master always prepared himself for great occasions by getting pretty well fuddled. And the sign painter's boy said that when the dominie had reached the proper condition on examination evening, he would manage the thing while he napped in his chair. Then he would have him awakened at the right time and hurried away to school. In the fullness of time, the interesting occasion arrived. At 8 in the evening, the schoolhouse was brilliantly lighted and adorned with wreaths and festoons of foliage and flowers. The master sat throned in his great chair upon a raised platform, with his blackboard behind him. He was looking tolerably mellow. 3 rows of benches on each side and 6 rows in front of him were occupied by the dignitaries of the town and by the parents of the pupils. To his left, back of the rows of citizens, was a spacious temporary platform upon which were seated the scholars who were to take part in the exercises of the evening. Rows of small boys washed and dressed to an intolerable state of discomfort, rows of gawky big boys, snowbanks of girls and young ladies clad in lawn and muslin, conspicuously conscious of their bare arms, their grandmother's ancient trinkets, their bits of pink and blue ribbon, and the flowers in their hair. All the rest of the house was filled with non-participating scholars. The exercises began. A very little boy stood up and sheepishly recited, "You'd scarce expect one of my age to speak in public on the stage," etc., accompanying himself with the painfully exact and spasmodic gestures which a machine might have used, supposing the machine to be a trifle out of order. But he got through safely, though cruelly scared, and got a fine round of applause when he made his manufactured bow and retired. A little shamefaced girl lisped, "Mary had a little lamb," etc., performed a compassion-inspiring curtsy, got her meed of applause, and sat down flushed and happy. Tom Sawyer stepped forward with conceited confidence and soared into the unquenchable and indestructible "Give me liberty or give me death" speech, with the fine fury and frantic gesticulation, and broke down in the middle of it. A ghastly stage fright seized him. His legs quaked under him, and he was like to choke. True, he had the manifest sympathy of the house, but he had the house's silence, too, which was even worse than its sympathy. The master frowned, and this completed the disaster. Tom struggled a while, and then retired, utterly defeated. There was a weak attempt at applause, but it died early. The boys stood on the burning deck followed. Also, the Assyrian came down, and other declamatory gems. Then there were reading exercises, and a spelling fight. The meager Latin class recited with honor. The prime feature of the evening was in order now. Original compositions by the young ladies. Each, in her turn, stepped forward to the edge of the platform, cleared her throat, held up her manuscript, tied with a dainty ribbon, and proceeded to read, with labored attention to expression and punctuation. The themes were the same that had been illuminated upon similar occasions by their mothers before them, their grandmothers, and doubtless all their ancestors in the female line, clear back to the Crusades. Friendship was one. Memories of other days, religion and history, dreamland, the advantages of culture, forms of political government compared and contrasted, melancholy, filial love, heart longings, etc., etc. A prevalent feature in these compositions was a nursed and petted melancholy. Another was a wasteful and opulent gush of fine language. Another was a tendency to lug in by the ears particularly prized words and phrases until they were worn entirely out, and a peculiarity that conspicuously marked and marred them was the inveterate and intolerable sermon that wagged its crippled tail at the end of each and every one of them. No matter what the subject might be, a brain-racking effort was made to squirm it into some aspect or other that the moral and religious mind could contemplate with edification. The glaring insincerity of these sermons was not sufficient to compass the banishment of the fashion from the schools. And it is not sufficient today. It never will be sufficient while the whole world stands, perhaps. There is no school in all our land where the young ladies do not feel obliged to close their compositions with a sermon. And you will find that the sermon of the most frivolous and the least religious girl in the school is always the longest and the most relentlessly pious. But enough of this. Homely truth is unpalatable. Let us return to the examination. The first composition that was read was one entitled, "Is This, Then, Life?" Perhaps the reader can endure an extract from it. In the common walks of life, with what delightful emotions does the youthful mind look forward to some anticipated scene of festivity. Imagination is busy sketching rose-tinted pictures of joy. In fancy, the voluptuous votary of fashion sees herself amid the festive throng, the observed of all observers. Her gracious form, arrayed in snowy robes, is whirling through the mazes of the joyous dance. Her eye is brightest, her step is lightest in the gay assembly. In such delicious fancies, time quickly glides by, and the welcome hour arrives for her entrance into the Elysian world, of which she has had such bright dreams. How fairy-like does everything appear to her enchanted vision. Each new scene is more charming than the last, but after a while, she finds that beneath this goodly exterior, all is vanity. The flattery which once charmed her soul now grates harshly upon her ear. The ballroom has lost its charms, and with wasted health and embittered heart, she turns away with conviction that earthly pleasures cannot satisfy the longings of the soul. And so forth and so on. There was a buzz of gratification from time to time during the reading, accompanied by whispered ejaculations of "how sweet, how eloquent, how so true," etc. And after the thing had closed with a peculiarly afflicting sermon, the applause was enthusiastic. Then arose a slim, melancholy girl, whose face had the interesting paleness that comes of pills and indigestion, and read a poem. 2 stanzas of it will do. A Missouri Maiden's Farewell to Alabama. Alabama, goodbye, I love thee well, but yet for a while I do leave thee now. Sad, yes, sad thoughts of thee my heart doth swell, and burning recollections throng my brow. For I have wandered through thy flowery woods, have roamed and read near Tallapoosa's stream, have listened to Tallassee's warning floods, and wooed on Coosa's side Aurora's beam. Yet shall I not bear an o'erfull heart, nor blush to turn behind my tearful eyes. 'Tis from no stranger land I now must part, 'tis no stranger's left I yield these sighs. Welcome and home were mine within this state, whose vales I leave, whose spires fade fast from me, and cold must be mine eyes and heart and tete, when, dear Alabama, they turn cold on thee. There were very few there who knew what tete meant, but the poem was very satisfactory, nevertheless. The next appeared a dark-complexioned, black-eyed, black-haired young lady who paused an impressive moment, assumed a tragic expression, and began to read in a measured, solemn tone. A vision. Dark and tempestuous was night. Around the throne on high not a single star quivered, but the deep intonations of the heavy thunder constantly vibrated upon the ear, whilst the terrific lightning revelled in angry mood through the cloudy chambers of heaven, seeming to scorn the power exerted over its terror by the illustrious Franklin. Even the boisterous winds unanimously came forth from their mystic homes, and blustered about as if to enhance by their aid the wildness of the scene. At such a time, so dark, so dreary, for human sympathy my very spirit sighed, but instead thereof, my dearest friend, my counselor, my comforter and guide, my joy in grief, my second bliss in joy, came to my side. She moved like one of those bright beings pictured in the sunny walks of fancy's Eden by the romantic and young, a queen of beauty unadorned save by her own transcendent loveliness. So soft was her step, it failed to make even a sound. And but for the magical thrill imparted by her genial touch, as other unobtrusive beauties, she would have glided away unperceived, unsought. A strange sadness rested upon her features, like icy tears upon the robe of December, as she pointed to the contending elements without, and bade me contemplate the two beings presented. This nightmare occupied some 10 pages of manuscript, and wound up with a sermon so destructive of all hope to non-Presbyterians that it took the first prize. This composition was considered to be the very finest effort of the evening. The mayor of the village, in delivering the prize to the author of it, made a warm speech in which he said that it was by far the most eloquent thing he had ever listened to, and that Daniel Webster himself might well be proud of it. It may be remarked, in passing, that the number of compositions in which the word beauteous was over-fondled, and human experience referred to as life's page, was up to the usual average. Now the master, mellow almost to the verge of geniality, put his chair aside, turned his back to the audience, and began to draw a map of America on the blackboard, to exercise the geography class upon. But he made a sad business of it with his unsteady hand, and a smothered titter rippled over the house. He knew what the matter was, and set himself to write it. He sponged out lines and remade them, but he only distorted them more than ever, and the tittering was more pronounced. He threw his entire attention upon his work now, as if determined not to be put down by the mirth. He felt that all eyes were fastened upon him. He imagined he was succeeding, and yet the tittering continued. It even manifestly increased, and well it might. There was a garret above, pierced with a scuttle over his head, and down through the scuttle came a cat, suspended around the haunches by a string. She had a rag tied about her head, and jaws to keep her from mewing. And she slowly descended. As she slowly descended, she curved upward and clawed at the string. She swung downward and clawed at the intangible air. The tittering rose higher and higher. The cat was in 6 inches of the absorbed teacher's head. Down, down, a little lower. She grabbed his wig with her desperate claws, clung to it, and was snatched up into the garret in an instant, with her trophy still in her possession. And how the light did blaze abroad from the master's bald pate, for the sign painter's boy had gilded it. That broke up the meeting. The boys were avenged. Vacation had come. All right, that brings us to the end of chapter 21. So that's funny enough, that actually brought up some memories there, because there'd be, like essay contests and things like that, like have constrained and theme and go through things, and it's like you write the dumbest shit trying to just make it sound like what you think they want to hear. Criminy. Half of you thinks half of the people that are writing it were doing their all to make something good. The other half were being like self-important, trying to come up with something that was just so extra to be of note. Yeah, that's writing for school. It's all about just flexing your chops and trying to convince people that you've learned your lessons. Leave me alone now. I'm done. All right, so next one is pretty short. So depending on the length of these chapters, we might get 2 in tonight before we get done. Oh yeah, the best is, so because you're like trying to mock the assignment, but you're trying to do it surreptitiously so they don't realize that you're mocking them. But you're a child, so you're not quite as slick as you think you are. So the other kids might not realize what you're doing, but the teacher reads it and thinks, this slick son of a bitch. The best is when you get away with it. I think I won a cash prize for one essay I wrote. It was the worst little thing I ever did, but didn't mean a lick of sense. It was just flowery and full of shit. But apparently they ate it right up. Of course, that carries on too, because you learn how to write like that in grade school, and that carries on. And the art of bullshitting for assignments is eternal. That's a skill that is practiced and polished to a fine sheen. That's how I got through college. It's all about writing to the assignment, for sure. When they ask if you want to be published, you're just like, oh, no, I couldn't possibly. Because in your heart, you handed in a piece of shit. Not to be passed around for anyone but the teacher to read. Yeah. When you're in business, it's all about writing exactly what you want heard. And now I'll write emails that way to polish the turd. Then you get the writing technical literature and knowledge articles and things like that, and then there's no flowery at all. It's as dry can be. Just get it done. All right, let's try and get another chapter or 2 in tonight. So let's continue now with chapter 22. Tom joined the new order of cadets of temperance, being attracted by the showy character of their regalia. He promised to abstain from smoking, chewing, and profanity as long as he remained a member. Now he found out a new thing, namely that to promise not to do a thing is the surest way in the world to make a body want to go and do that very thing. Tom is wise beyond his years. Tom soon found himself tormented with a desire to drink and swear. The desire grew to be so intense that nothing but the hope of a chance to display himself in his red sash kept him from withdrawing from the order. Fourth of July was coming, but he soon gave that up. He gave it up before he had worn his shackles over 48 hours, and had fixed his hopes upon old Judge Fraser, justice of the peace, who was apparently on his deathbed and would have a big public funeral, since he was so high an official. During 3 days, Tom was deeply concerned about the judge's condition and hungry for news of it. Sometimes his hopes ran high, so high that he would venture to get out his regalia and practice before the looking glass. But the judge had a most discouraging way of fluctuating. At last he was pronounced upon the mend, and then convalescent. Tom was disgusted and felt a sense of injury. He handed in his resignation at once, and that night the judge suffered a relapse and died. Tom resolved that he would never trust a man like that again. The funeral was a fine thing. The cadets paraded in a style calculated to kill the late member with envy. Tom was a free boy again, however. There was something in that. He could drink and swear now, but found to his surprise that he did not want to. The simple fact that he could took the desire away, and the charm of it. Tom presently wondered to find that his coveted vacation was beginning to hang a little heavily on his hands. He attempted a diary, but nothing happened during 3 days, so he abandoned it. The first of all the Negro minstrel shows came to town and made a sensation. Tom and Joe Harper got up a band of performers and were happy for 2 days. Even the glorious Fourth was in some sense a failure, for it rained hard. There was no procession in consequence. And the greatest man in the world, as Tom supposed, Mr. Benton, an actual United States Senator, proved an overwhelming disappointment, for he was not 25 feet high, nor even anywhere in the neighborhood of it. A circus came. The boys played circus for 3 days afterward in tents made of rag carpeting. Admission 3 pins for boys, 2 for girls, and then circusing was abandoned. A phrenologist and a mesmerizer came, and went again, and left the village duller and drearier than ever. There were some boys and girls parties, but there were so few and so delightful that they only made the aching voids between ache the harder. Becky Thatcher was gone to her Constantinople home to stay with her parents during vacation, so there was no bright side to life anywhere. The dreadful secret of the murder was a chronic misery. It was a very cancer for permanency and pain. Then came the measles. Oh yeah, and all of a sudden we're contemporary again. Thanks, RFK. During 2 long weeks, Tom lay a prisoner, dead to the world and its happenings. He was very ill. He was interested in nothing. When he got upon his feet at last and moved feebly downtown, a melancholy change had come over everything and every creature. There had been a revival, and everybody had got religion. Not only the adults, but even the boys and girls. Tom went about, hoping against hope for the sight of one blessed sinful face, but disappointment crossed him everywhere. He found Joe Harper studying a testament, and turned sadly away from the depressing spectacle. He saw Ben Rogers, and found him visiting the poor with a basket of tracts. He hunted up Jim Hollis, who called his attention to the precious blessing of his late measles as a warning. Every boy he encountered added another ton to his depression, and when, in desperation, he flew for refuge at last to the bosom of Huckleberry Finn, and was received with a scriptural quotation, his heart broke, and he crept home and to bed, realizing that he alone of all the town was lost forever and ever. And that night, there came on a terrific storm, with driving rain, awful claps of thunder, blinding sheets of lightning. He covered his head with the bedclothes and waited in horror of suspense for his doom, for he had not the shadow of a doubt that all this hubbub was about him. He believed he had taxed the forbearance of the powers above to the extremity of endurance, and that this was the result. It might have seemed to him a waste of pomp and ammunition to kill a bug with a battery of artillery, but there seemed nothing incongruous about the getting up of such an expensive thunderstorm as this to knock the turf from under an insect like himself. By and by, the tempest spent itself, and died without accomplishing its object. The boy's first impulse was to be grateful and reform. His second was to wait, for there might not be any more storms. The next day, the doctors were back. Tom had relapsed. The 3 weeks he spent on his back this time seemed an entire age. When he got abroad at last, he was hardly grateful that he had been spared, remembering how lonely was his estate, how companionless and forlorn he was. He drifted listlessly down the street and found Jim Hollis acting as judge in a juvenile court that was trying a cat for murder in the presence of her victim, a bird. He found Joe Harper and Huck Finn up an alley eating a stolen melon. Poor lads! They, like Tom, had suffered a relapse. And that brings us to the end of chapter 22. Alright, the next chapter is about 10 pages long, and we don't really have that much time, so we will probably call it here. So yeah, we've not really had a whole lot of story going on with this. We've been kind of joking about it earlier, but it's been the not quite living up to its adventures. It's fun. There are bits of truisms and remembrances and reminiscences and nostalgias, but not so much plot as you might expect, which by itself makes it's kind of understandable. This is at its root a children's book. It's meant to be about a boy having fun and going about life and being full of whimsy, and it does fit the bill really well. And it, as with everything, the intended audience doesn't really make the end all be all. And each audience does take different things from the book. For children, yes, I'm sure this just sounds like a fun book. It's like, oh yeah, I would do that, or oh yes, this is how the schoolyard is, blah 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 blah. And then for us old folks, it's full of nostalgia and like, oh yeah, that's somehow times have never really changed, or oh, I did something like that back in the day. And so it's less about the adventures and more about being lost in reminiscence. But it will be nice to get some plot. But we are at about 60% of the way through the book. So they will have to get back to the murder at some point. Injun Joe will come into view and cause a ruckus and be threatening, and the boys will have to do something about it. But until then, we're left in suspense, which also works pretty well. And we do have to remember, these kids are like 10. So even back then, when kids grew up fast, they're still 10. So I wouldn't rush things. We're still enjoying this all the same. But it almost feels like there's a great hullabaloo, much ado about nothing. And that's fine. It's just, dangling, waiting. Suspense is building and building as we're waiting for something to happen and nothing at all happens. And that's part of the charm, right? All right. So we will go ahead and wrap up here. We will be back on Tuesday, and given our pacing, we're getting about 20% through each night. So we'll probably, at this rate, finish up, I expect, probably on our Friday reading. We'll read on Tuesday, get through a good chunk, and then we'll see if we can finish up on Friday. And that'll leave us with some time to come up with. We'll be getting through, we'll be about halfway through August at that point. But we'll have two more days to make up for the week. We might do some short stories, or we'll come up with something different. We've got a lot to pull from. It might be time to revisit some series that we've enjoyed before, and it'll be time to revisit. We've got Holmes to go back to. We've got what have we started but not finished? We got Alice in Wonderland to go back to. We've still got short stories of Lovecraft to get to. On the topic of Lovecraft, we've got Poe, but I kind of want to save Poe for September, October, if we can. I figure we'll use October will mostly be like Poe and Stoker. That'll probably eat up most of the month, if I'm being honest with myself. So we'll come up with some odds and ends to get us through the time. If we do Alice in Wonderland, it'll probably take us just the 2 days, I expect, because we got through the first book in 2 days, and I don't think Through the Looking Glass is much longer. So that could be fun, and that could get us into a fresh week, and we can go from there. That might be something to do. Or we could take on some of the more heftier cases from Sherlock Holmes. I don't remember how long those are, but the bigger cases are obviously longer than the ones we read before. Because in the collection we read to start off with Holmes, it was just a chapter length of each case. So we've got a lot of options. I'll look things over, and we've got some time to come up with it. That's part of why I give myself that 2-day break in the during the week and the Monday break. So we've got some time to figure out what our direction will be and what will come up next. And as we come up toward the end of this one, I will again reach out for suggestions or things that people want to hear. Because as always, we don't do this just for my literature exploration. I'll read anything. If it's pages on print, or if it's print on pages, I'll read it. So if there's things that people want to hear read, I'm always game. All right, that's enough ranting and raving for me for the night. Let's go ahead and call it an evening. Thank you very much for joining us once again for our continued reading of The Adventures of Tom Sawyer. If you've not yet, I encourage you to give a like on the stream, subscribe to the channel. We're always trying to grow our little book club, having a good time of it. We try to have fun around here. And until then, have a good Sunday. Have a good night. Thank you very much. Bye now.